Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we're here with Dario Nardi, and we're here to talk about what the function stacks really are for each of the 16 types. And we're going to start with the ISFP and the INFP. And so we have the traditional 4-stack grant model that we typically use in the type community. However, researchers who have collected data on type actually suggest that the function stack model might be a little different than what we think it is. And so we're here today to talk about Dario's collection of over 200,000 results from different people about how the function stack actually looks like in real application. So I'll toss it to Dario to explain a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a graphic we can show in a minute, and I have to give Matt Sherman credit for that graphic that I think gives us a better perspective. And it brings in all 8 of the functions. Like you mentioned, this is analysis of over 200,000 people. And this is with my colleague in the type community, Professor Amina Barmani at Johns Hopkins, and 2 of her colleagues. And this fits with prior data that was done by an analysis by Mark Majors and others that show that this idea of one particular grant stack might be true at a very deep level. But when we ask people about skillful use or what it is that you're actually showing up as, that we get something different. And in fact, we get like an overall picture that shows that people develop in 2 or 3 different ways. And then for each of the types, as you mentioned, we can also talk about what do those variations look like. And you might think well, why is there variations? And it's because all of the data from the Minnesota identical twins genetic study say that personality is 40 to 60% inherited. And they used MBTI and 5-factor model and the Minnesota multiphasic model and all of this. That means that 60 to 40% of personality is environment. And I believe that one of the type superpowers is it's about development. And the fact is we're developing in a social, cultural context and career context. And so the functions that we learn to use in different roles and learn to use better or worse are going to vary from one person to the next, depending upon their upbringing, their job, all of these things. I mean, I think people can point to times in their lives and they'll say, yeah, I can see I use my favorite functions or dominant function really early in life. And then after that, they point to moments when they were teenagers or 20s or 30s when they're yeah, and then I got much better at this other function because I had to. Or there was something internal that just sort of pushed that. So yeah, it's really nice stuff. And I know it's going to be a little bit shocking in some way to people, but I also think it's very exciting. And some people have even said in hearing the results, they feel it's relieving because they feel oh, I'm this type. I'm pretty sure I'm this type, but this development model of this exact stack doesn't work for me. And is something wrong with me? Is this good or bad? Whatever it is. And I'm well, it turns out when we dig into the data, we see what are called in the analysis, the statistics, different classes. So for dominant introverted feeling types, ISFP, INFP, there's 4 different classes that cover a lot of people with dominant FI. And then there's always those marginal cases. The person is just particularly weird or something unusual. But just being able to acknowledge this and say, yes, there are these different things. And by the way, the grant model is not the only accepted model. Through even the early 2000s, there was a lot of debate and competition. Naomi Quank, who was a psychotherapist, very early on in the type community involved, she believed the grant model was wrong. It did not match her experience and all of the clients that she saw. And then what she saw and what Grant saw both show up as different classes. So I'm no wonder they got different results, because it's if you have 30% of people are one and 50% of people are another, and then the other 20% are a little bit different, and we're going to force them into one of the other two, or we're going to try and force everybody into one, at least in terms of skillful use. So the great news is the analysis really confirms there are 8 distinct functions. And this is what Roger Pearman, who's also a long time person in the type community now, I think he's in his 80s, been using type for 40, 50 years. When asked, like, what do people think is true about type theory, he's like, everybody has a dominant function. And he's like, that's it. Like, that's the only thing I can say for sure. And that's actually what Jung said. And then anything after that, Jung was like, well, there is like a second function that can come in and like balance the dominant function. He just sort of mentioned that in like a paragraph or three. He didn't even flesh them all out. So I think now people can feel liberated to know that they can still be a type, and their use of the functions or the way the functions are expressed, I think use implies we're like completely conscious about it, which is a little bit maybe too optimistic. But the way we express the functions really does vary within type.
Yeah, it's very liberating and relieving to know that your experience makes sense. And I could see people being very confused. Like they know they're a certain type, but they don't match up with the classical expression of it. Like, say, for example, an ENFP who's really good with other people's feelings and then feeling very confused about that. It's like, oh, I'm aware of my own feelings, but I don't see myself as selfish. So, what's going on with that? And so it helps clarify a lot of people's confusions.
Mhm.
And so before we get to that, I'd like to promo your event coming up. I'm just gonna pull it up on screen. Give me one moment.
It's actually our event because you will be there.
Yes, I will be there as the special guest. So Dario and I, we're holding a Young for Life event. It's a immersive 3-day weekend retreat, both in New York and Chicago. It includes Dario signed books, and he's even buying you lunch. You're gonna have time to talk with Dario. You get to talk to one of the giants in the type field. And also you can get your brain imaged in EEG format. Jung talked way more than just personality types, and Dario will be going over that. Going over active imagination, the shamanistic elements, and other things like Qigong, yoga that Jung mentions that we don't always participate in the type community. But if you want to learn more about a holistic sense of Jung's teachings, I highly recommend you go to this event. Not to mention, you'll meet me as well, so we can all get to know each other and have a really amazing time just doing all these activities and getting to know ourselves more and hear the whisper of our souls a little stronger through these shamanistic activities. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited for it. And you attended the one that was twice as long, 6 days, which was like a kickoff test version here in northern Arizona last October. And it's really a pleasure to like distill the essential elements of that and put that together for a 3-day event. People might be surprised to know that Jung, in many ways, talked more about yoga than he did about personality type, and that body mind connections there. So that's one of the things that we're going to do. And I like mixing in qigong because it brings in a little bit more. I want to say like yang or yang element to yoga, and then the human connection practice, which, as you know, is a little bit hard to discover or to explain. But once you discover it, it is like, oh, wow, just in 10 minutes, we can have a very intense experience about working with shadow and working with persona. And Jung was very interested in shamanism, whether that he distilled that in active imagination, and we're going to do some of that, as well as this drum journey and breathwork stuff that's part of it. Group relations, because Jung believed that all of the unowned parts of ourselves, or the undeveloped parts, we project out into what he called the social and political sphere. And so with group relations, that's a very nice, fun activity to do, which I did many years at UCLA. I think 17 years of it. And then, of course, personality type. Like, that's the beauty, is that folks know type, and so we can talk type at lunch and dinner and in the evenings. And this is a little bit of an exclusive event. There are a maximum of 14 people for each workshop. And they're very nice spaces at the Golden Drum in New York City, just across the river from Manhattan, and the Center for Change and Healing in Chicago, which is a beautiful location with, weather permitting, some outdoor stuff, or at least the chance to escape outdoors for a while. So yeah, it will be you and me and our guests and participants, and I'm very, very excited to be offering this again, especially to get it in like a 3-day period. It's going to be, boy, the people who attended last fall, like they are all still together as a tight group, and come to the monthly like active imagination shamanic drum journey meetings, and really found it quite profound. So yeah, whether a person is body mind practitioner, they're just interested as a sort of a type enthusiast, spiritual and religious interests, actors and artists. You get a lot out of this. People who do leadership and management stuff, coaching, counseling, yoga, martial arts. Anyone who just wants to know more about Jung, and of course neuroscience, because I always bring in some neuroscience with everything. So I hope we have room actually for everybody who wants to come, because 14 people is not a lot, but it does allow for more like one-on-one kind of interaction. Like everybody has time to say something, and everybody gets personal attention.
Yeah, so it's super affordable as well. And if you feel like signing up, the link is down below. I'd love to see you there. All right, so on to the FI dominance. I see that you have this beautiful AI image here. So,
Yes, yeah, Matt, and I think Matt Sherman for this. The first time around, I explained it in terms of buildings, which I suppose is like as a thinking type. That's what I'm going to do. And Matt's like, "How about people?" And so, folks, whether you're familiar with the 4-function basic stack, which is the 4 people standing there. So this is for INFP, and we're going to talk about INFP today, where FI is the dominant function, the heroic lead role in the personality. Extroverted intuiting, or NE, is the support or auxiliary role. Some people call that the good parent. It's good at parenting others, giving advice to others. Sort of rounds us out in many ways. And then the 3rd and 4th, you see that they're smaller and they're facing away, and those would be the additional functions. Now, those are 4, but really there are 8. And John Beebe, who I'm sure many of you have heard of, he talks about all 8 functions. And people normally see them in like a stack from top to bottom, like 1, 2, 3, 6, 7, 8. And John said the numbering system is just for convenience of reference. Like they don't actually come in this order. It's like, this is just an easy way for us to communicate about them. And what's important is the role that they play, and what the data shows from the analysis to over 200,000 people, but also Mina Barmani's analysis of the Majors PTI and like other type instruments and data sets, is that really the shadow functions, which are shown as shadows here, or reflections on the surface of the water, they don't come like further down last, that actually they are mirror images. So like for somebody who has FI in the lead role, INFP or ISFP, FE is there, like big and clear, and it's just a shadow or reflection, but it's not like way down there. And the same for the other functions. And to very broadly state the overall results, regardless of type, like across all 16 types, this is the model that we see. That what Mina calls the tricycle model, or the 2 and 2 model, that essentially people are either going to develop similar to the grant model, like the actual people standing there, FINE, SITE, or they're going to develop the ones that are on the left-hand side of the image. So FINE, FENI, with some personal variations, of course. And I think those personal variations, and also just variations among some of the types, are because, why? Because the types are not evenly distributed in the population. So for example, introverted sensing, that's an expectation that all of us have to develop. That's like the modal function in the population, along with extroverted thinking and extroverted sensing, or sorry, or extroverted feeling. And so, every type is going to be pulled in its own direction relative to the cultural norm. And that shows up in the data too. But essentially, this image captures what's going on, and then we'll actually dive into the types and see what they look like.
There is a shadow cast by each of the functions, and so we actually use all 8 functions to let everyone know too. And so I'm curious, it seems like there's 2 versions of each type, and so I'm wondering if we could go through each of them, and we could start with INFP. So what are the 2 types of INFP?
Yeah, certainly. So the cognitive processes assessment, or CPA, which is at keystocognition.com, and folks can take that for free. We took there are 48 questions there, and we took the top 24 performing questions. And when we take those and then like distill them into like little function descriptions, they look like the 8 functions that we're all used to. So that's really great news. All of that you've learned, extroverted feeling looks like this, and introverted sensing looks like that, and like that's very familiar. And for INFP, yeah, the introverted feeling and extroverted intuiting look like what we're going to get. And then as we take the data, because everybody gets a unique profile, like a bar chart, basically, of the 8 functions, everybody will have a different picture, an organic picture of what it is for them, their reported skilled use. And what we find is, for folks with introverted feeling first in the lead role, we have 4 in statistics, what are called classes. And 2 of those look quite a bit like INFP, and 2 of those look quite a bit like ISFP, like we know and love. But each one of those classes diverges and has a different sort of like profile of function use, a different stack, at least in terms of skilled use. And one thing I would add about it is those classes don't cover everybody. Okay, this is statistical, so these are clusters, and they cover what we estimate is 85 to 90% of people. And then there's always 10 to 15% of people who are like, oh, but mine, I got very different results. And I'm like, sure you did, because you're in that like 80, 15% of people means like 1 in 6 people. So that's actually quite a lot that are just going to have their own unique thing. So in a way, there's like 2 plus like a little group of other folks that all have their own interesting different things. This is why we're talking about INFP and ISFP together first. And shall we just jump into INFP and see what they look like?
This sounds great.
Okay. So the first class of INFP, like what does their function stack look like? They're more like an all-around idealist. So I want to say that there's somebody who could easily think, okay, they're INFP, but I could be INFJ, I could be ENFP, maybe even they've been typed as ENFJ. Like they've really just focused on their functions. They tend to be a little bit more introverted. So usually the question is between INFP and INFJ, which, by the way, is one of the most common conundrums in the type community. Like among people who are sorting for type, this is maybe the most infamous that comes up. And I'm like, yeah, it comes up because there is a whole developmental path for INFP, one of the most common ones that looks just like this. And specifically, it's about 25% of folks with FI dominant, and it's probably 40%, 30 to 40% of INFPs overall. And so they have really good FI, as we expect. They're a little bit more introverted, and their intuition often looks more introverted as well. And so for folks who follow my brain imaging research, it's like people who have more back of the brain, more reflective style, and they're like, well, I relate to FI and NI, and sure, I do a little bit of NE, but it doesn't always work out for me. I don't feel like the sort of the stereotypical INFP. What they do have, though, they do have some introverted sensing is third, so that comes in. That's a prominent thing for them. And then they also have extroverted feelings, so that when they do extrovert, that their style is more caring about people and warm, and concerned about others. And the example sort of career that I can give is like, maybe there's somebody who writes about spirituality and psychology, or they're a teacher who's more like, yeah, let's like read this material and contemplate and discuss. And they really have almost like a monastic flavor to them. And it's still, when, like I said, when they do extrovert, it could feel like they're like, yeah, I do care about others, and that comes across, and I'm thinking about what's going on with people. And they're really looking for like moral clarity, being true to their moral compass, and sort of timeless ideas. They're very comfortable with spiritual stuff, so you give them an activity that would be an NI activity, like active imagination, and they're like, oh, I'm totally on this. Or maybe they're writing like a fantasy novel, and they're using their imagination, and they need to do this alone. This isn't bouncing ideas off of others. So it feels very NI to them. And then where they have their blind spot is the usual blind spots that we would expect, that the action taking. This is not a big thing for them. Don't expect them to go like off-road, like motorbiking. Also, just even though they have this rich imagination, they're not like the NE types that are very much out there and with others doing stuff and like getting this constant sort of feedback loop from the world. They can become, even though they're warm and friendly, they can become overwhelmed by large audiences. And then the thinking functions are also not so strong, just as we'd expect for INFP. And that's like a quick look at what this looks like. The type of INFP that's like sort of minimalist. They like to work by themselves. Their imagination is by themselves. They appreciate the SI stuff, like something that's comfortable and convenient, that's natural. They do journaling, and they like stillness and their alone time. And they're very idealistic as you start to get to know them. And that's again that INFP or INFJ. And yet we see in the stack like, no, they're INFP, but we can see why they would be debating.
Yeah, so it seems like this INFP has strong FI and NI with some NE in there, and their SI is also there. And it seems like because their sixth function NI is so strong, they can look like INFJs. They also seem to have a bit of extroverted feeling too. So
Mhm.
that creates an ultra NF idealist INFP.
Exactly. And this fits with what we've seen, what Mina Barmani and I call the tricycle model, that 50% of people really actually have or report that they have in use a strong sixth function. Now, they could still play the same role of being a defensive role, because the shadow functions are often described as helping us with defending ourselves. And instead of thinking defenses as something separate from the personality or just in the shadow, it's like some of it is brought into the light and is made useful, and it's like the healthy side of the sixth function. And so there's an element of like NF wisdom all the time that they have.
Mm, yeah, well said. And then when it comes to the other type of INFP, how would that look?
Yeah, absolutely. So this other version of INFP is more leaning into their opposite type. So that would be STJ. So introverted sensing, extroverted thinking. This is the kind of INFP that notices at some point, probably early on, I'm in an STJ culture. I need to adapt. I'm going to be working in corporate America, or I'm going to be working in a big organization, or I work by myself, but my clients are so many, not even maybe STJs, but there's this whole expectation of how our whole culture is organized, the STJ universe. So they find a way to fit in. So they have FI, yes, but very quickly what comes up is the introverted sensing and the thinking function, more extroverted thinking, of course, because INFPs can lean into that more. And then what comes later is the feeling side. And as usual, of course, for all the INFPs, extroverted sensing is that the blind spot that's there. But they don't even have like very good six function. Like they're introverted intuiting because there's not a lot of space for spirituality in the workplace, or yes, there is space for vision, but the way that Jung talked about NI, which is primarily about being in touch with the archetypes and fantasy and just spirituality and all of that, that gets pushed down. And what comes out is more their TE and SI. And to give some examples, this person could be, let's say that they work in a hospital, or they became a nurse, which, by the way, I know several INFPs who became nurses. They quickly discovered that maybe the day-to-day logistics of nursing is not their thing, but what they do enjoy is things like medical policy, ethics, good clinical practice, what is a way to treat the person holistically. And they are the kind of person that's comfortable with, the kind of INFP that's comfortable with, there are documents, there's bureaucracy, there are filing systems. And remember, the CPA is asking about skilled use. It's not asking whether you like it or not. That's a different question. And at some point, they chose within themselves, they're like, I want to do this, and I want to become like a working, I don't want to say cog, but part of the larger society. And so they're going to have to learn all of that stuff, steps 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, to create, probably with their extroverted intuiting, they're going to create like metaphors, and they're going to have quotes and the inspirational quotes and that kind of thing. And a lot of what they end up doing is about influencing institutions, and being aware of their own personal conscience and wanting to know, following this example of being in medicine, which is very institutional and very logistical, like, are we following ethical standards? So they do have this capacity to fit in, which is really amazing. And then where they might not be as comfortable is sort of funny thing is maybe the spontaneity and ambiguity that comes with extroverted intuiting, which would normally be their second function, but they felt like, no, I have to shape it and keep it contained. And then that sensory connection to the outside is usually also a difficulty. And when it comes to connecting with society, it's going to be that TE version, because that's what they've learned and what they've seen. Sometimes that could be extroverted feeling also, because they bring this inner warmth, but that actual outer warmth there would be more like the other kind of INFP that would be there. So it's very much about following their moral compass within and for the benefit of our social institutions, our STJ social institutions in society.
Yeah, so to recap, just to make sure I'm understanding this right, their FI is strong, and also in some ways they've had to mask TE, and so there's a skillful usage of it in a way. And what were the relationships with the other functions again in the kind of.
So the introverted sensing is also pretty well developed in terms of use, because so many institutions, like just how they work. So TESI together is like what STJ is about. And then they do have even some introverted thinking that's going to be there, and of course some extroverted intuiting, because that's one is their natural function, and the other one is just in a thinking society, we're sort of pushed to use mental models and have definitions and that kind of thing, which means that the more like open-ended, effusive, let me just write a fantasy story kind of extroverted intuiting gets pushed down. And then the other functions are sort of in the middle, or like the extroverted sensing, again, is going to be something that's a blind spot for the type.
It almost seems like this kind of INFP is more normalizing or dominant in your brain subtypes, whereas is the first type of INFP a little bit more likely to be harmonizing or creative?
Yes, that's exactly it. And that's even in the brain data at the very beginning, when my interns just went and they picked ENFP, but the idea was, let's just sort them into two groups in terms of networks. And there was essentially a yin and yang version of each one. And so the first kind of INFP we talked about, which is very idealist like, intuition and feeling in all of its forms, is very much holistic, more the holistic or harmonizing style. And then the second version, which is about fitting into society, the STJ society, is more normalizing or dominant. Yes.
Okay. Function usage is almost influenced by your environment in quite a bit of a way.
Yeah. And again, I want to stress this is not about what the person prefers to do. I know somebody who works at a high level administrative level, not an executive, but high support administrative level, INFP preferences at UCLA. And she just had to buckle under at some point in the past and decide, I'm going to have to do a certain number of years in order to get like a nice pension and like medical benefits. And gosh, there's so much bureaucracy and details and logistics. And her SI is able to step up and do that. And then, of course, she knows how to show the TE stuff and appreciates that. And weirdly, I know her through a writing group, and that's like the little part in her life where she actually gets to do her more like extroverted intuiting side of herself. And she does use extroverted intuiting in her work, but it's all about writing inspirational letters to the alumni, which have to fit into a lot of different parameters. And so it's very tamed and controlled, which is what we get with the normalizing or dominant brain patterns.
Yeah, so they're a little bit more grounded as an INFP, or at least
Yes.
they appear to be because they've had to learn to.
Yes.
Got it. Thank you so much, Dario. Do you have anything else you'd like to add on the INFP personality that we haven't touched on?
Yeah, I would say, of course, that when we have a chance down the line to talk about the brain archetypes, we'll see that there's more than these two broad categories. And again, the data says that maybe 85 or 90% of people fit into these two, but that does leave, if you're listening out there and you're like, I'm INFP and I can see myself in both of these, I'm like, yeah, you could easily be one of those 1 in 6 INFPs that just had a stack that is like truly unique to your life and your life circumstances. And your brain is going to be a mixture that's not the straight like left brain, right brain, to use a very broad stereotype.
Yeah, you can always be the rare INFP among the INFPs. So I wonder if being that special would make them feel great, or if they would feel despaired because they feel like they want to find something that
Mhm.
they can land on for sure.
I do find, I want to add one thing, and it's about type discovery. And this is just anecdotal because this is not coming from the data, but the second class of INFPs, that second path where they have to lean into their opposite, usually they're quite clear on what their type preferences are, that they are INFPs, because they see every day and have experienced for years the struggle of reconciling themselves with their opposite in society. The first version is the one that is often the one that's like, gosh, I can't pick my type. And it's very understandable because they have this mix of intuiting and feeling functions that's a little of this and a little of that. And yeah, it's FI at the top, but we're all just sort of a big family here. And that's why they're going to be debating which of the NF types probably they might be.
Makes total sense. Um, when your NF functions are all strong, then it can be difficult to know which NF you are. And especially with the extroverted intuition, you can go like, what about this? What about that? What about that? And the identity exploration can be kind of intoxicating in that sense. It's like, oh, this is really fun, actually.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I'm glad that you're able to illustrate the two kinds of INFPs, the more, let's say, like stereotypical kind, or maybe not even that stereotypical because they might feel a little different than just having FI and any.
Mhm.
So, I guess they're onto something when a lot of FI users are like, "Don't put me into a box," because they do know that the box is bigger than what people say that it is. And so in a way, you're illustrating how flexible the definitions are of these types.
Yes.
On that note, we're on to ISFPs. And so Dario Nardi actually collected this data in terms of dominant function. So ISFP and INFP were kind of conglomerated into one pack of information.
Mhm.
So, yeah, with this first type of ISFP, would they lean more on their first, second, third, and sixth function? I'm curious about how that would play out for you.
Yes, yes. So the answer is yes. So we're going to talk about these two, and the first one follows what the data has suggested, and when I talk about in the Magic Diamond and decode your personality, is that this type we see a lot. Yeah, of course, their dominant function FI is first, extroverted sensing is second, but then after that we see their third and sixth functions, and then very quickly right after we see extroverted thinking, because they're of the two models, like usually one is leaning into their opposite type and the other one is leaning into something else, like their function pairs or their like a profession or something like that. So this is a version that is more yeah, that getting with that sixth function with the introverted sensing and also extroverted thinking, but they have the NI is strong too. So they're like when we talked about two INFPs, and one INFP sort of specializes in just being NFs and very idealistic and fantasy oriented and writers and therapists and so on. And then the other INFP is like about corporate America and how do I fit in and be successful. And so our first ISFP is like that INFP that's like, how do I fit in? How do I be successful? So they need that introverted sensing, extroverted thinking. And in many ways, they're leaning into society, but they're also leaning into their opposite type of NTJ because they have that introverted intuiting and extroverted thinking. So they're more the adaptive version, the kind that's going to be dominant or normalizing subtypes, to touch on the brain imaging research. And they're going to be somebody who I call like a craft entrepreneur or a performance entrepreneur. So they're business minded, like they may have multiple little business ventures that they've done. They often have some particular like performance or craft work that they do. They may run a shop. I mean, they could be on Amazon these days. It doesn't have to be a literal shop. They like their studio. They like all of their tools that they use, their tactile tools. Of course, there's the extroverted sensing part. It's like, is it, warm and beautiful and relaxing? But there's also the introverted sensing that is the attention to fine detail, like these handmade things, and then knowing how do I fit in, uh, be able to sell stuff, for example, in a marketplace, and what are all of the details of the industry that I'm in or the organization that I'm a part of. So they're able to create as ISFP something sort of beautiful and durable and value rich, and of course in alignment with their ethics, and at the same time has this like element of vision and I want to be successful and either climb up into their job. I really believe Jonathan Ive, who is the person at Apple for many decades responsible for the Apple interface with the beautiful, not the, I mean, all the icons and all of that go way back to like Park Xerox in the early 70s, but who kept alive like the design of the beauty of the icons and creating like a flowing movement and experience, and the iPhone and the way it's designed visually. I believe he's ISFP preferences, and he has to design all of that within the constraints of organizational demands, profit, like statistics of how people use things, having a vision for, here's the product and here's what it needs to look like. Let me work within that. So they can be pretty entrepreneurial and business minded, whether that's more STJ or NTJ, like they bring both of those in. And then where their blind spots are going to be the usual blind spot for ISFP, which is extroverted intuiting, which is that like sort of random, open-ended, not just brainstorming, but getting feedback from the environment that's very abstract and invisible. They may not be very good at the extroverted feeling either, in terms of like, oh, well, you're going to do this because you're supposed to do this because of some social value. Like, still know their FI is very strong, and if they have to meet social demands, it's the extroverted thinking, empirical stuff that is presenting them with the parameters for success.
Mm. I think because ISFPs can be so hands-on, when they really actually do find a thing that they want to do, they can really go into it and immerse themselves in it and then create a lot within that space.
Mhm,
So,
mhm.
yeah. The SE can look like TE in a lot of ways.
Yes. Yeah. And SE and TE can work together pretty well. Both of them are concerned with what is here right in front of us. It's just that TE is more about whatever is measurable that's right in front of us, factually, concretely, evidence and effectiveness. And then the SE is also about effectiveness, but more effectiveness of action. Like what is impressive to people and what can I actually do to create something or to accomplish something, to win at something, because it takes that NI and SE together to have that, like that, the willpower to push yourself towards the perfection of the winning action, and it takes the six function SI to come in to do like the daily habit building in order to make it work. So that even if the person is not in business per se, they're in like sport performance or something like that, they still can be on this dominant normalizing side, this version of ISFP.
I'm curious about the other type of ISFP that you've uncovered. How does that look like?
Yeah, so that version of ISFP is just as the two INFPs are different, this ISFP is also different. They're leaning more into their function pair, so the feeling and sensing, regardless of how that shows up. And in practice, what happens is that extroverted intuiting also gets fairly well developed, at least for what they're doing in their career. And remember that I know I emphasized this in the INFP video. I want to emphasize it here is that the CPA asks about skillful use. It does not ask about preference. And also people are, it's self-report. So they may not be as great at any as they think that they are. But when you think about the whether it is psychology or it is the arts, that those are two domains, two worlds where there are a lot of NFs as well as SFs. And those NFs are bringing in extroverted intuiting. And so if you look at something like O or Cirque du Soleil, there's this element of imagination that's there. Or you look at psychotherapy and it's like, okay, yes, like we're sitting with the individual and we're doing like coaching or counseling, but we also need to have these very much like psychotherapy is influenced by things like mental models of like how people behave, or there might even be like narrative therapy or art therapy, which has this element of creativity and open-ended expressiveness, so allowing the ideas to go out and express themselves. And they're most likely working with people who are NFs and NFPs. So this is a type that is the version that's going to be wondering, gosh, am I really an INFP or ENFP or INFJ? And that's what this version is about. And they're much more likely, they're not going to be in business. They're most likely going to be in the performing arts or as the counselors, in maybe some kind of education, but not just standing up in front of a class and talking. It's more like these are kids or even adults who need special attention. Maybe they've experienced trauma. Maybe it's a growth-oriented environment. So they're used to this like expressive, collective, sort of eclectic space where you might have music, poetry, art tools, but is more open-ended and has that like NF sort of vibe to it, along with the sensing, feeling parts. And we see this a lot when we get to INFJ. We're going to see this too, because there's a version of INFJ which very much gets into like yoga and dance and the expressive arts. And you're like, well, wow, they're using a lot of sensing, extroverted sensing especially, more than you might think for the type. And it's like, yeah, because the domain that they're in, that's where it's going to show up. And then where they have difficulty is where the other ISFP has a strength. So logical precision, structure and discipline, empiricism, like following rules and deadlines. Their introverted intuition, the way it comes up, is going to be more in like the archetypal, emotive, creative element. And in terms of having long-term vision or planning, no. Like that is not where we're going to get. And so basically this comes down to the first version of ISFP was a dominant or normalizing. subtype. And then this version is the harmonizing or creative version that mixes in very well with their NFP and even NFJ counterparts in the arts and human services.
Yeah, and so I'm curious as to, with the function stack, with the more creative and harmonizing ISFP, are they more the top two functions plus six heavy? Let's say FI, SE, NI, um, SI,
Mm.
and
So what it looks like for them is that if I was first, of course, and we have SE there, and then we have actually extroverted feeling and extroverted intuiting as functions that maybe they don't prefer, but they have skilled use in because their environment is asking them to interact with other people, consider other people's needs and values. They're supposed to be ideationally expressive, open to like new ideas and creativity and brainstorming. And then the third and sixth functions are in the middle. So
mm,
the introverted intuiting and introverted sensing, like the introverted sensing is not that part about like following rules and stuff like that, or like logistical stuff. It's just about like the habit of showing up to do dance or to see the clients. And then the introverted intuiting again is the softer version that's more about channeling the creative muses rather than this like vision of the future. And that's why they sort of sit in between. And then the thinking functions are like dead last. And this is not the version of ISFP. The first version of ISFP is one that you can approach to talk about type. And you'd have to frame it as like, this is why it's useful for business or to make you successful or to know yourself better. And then for this version of ISFP, type is just, they're going to set it through this lens of like, how are people going to respond to this? And do I like it? I don't want to box people in. I'm certainly not interested in all of the technical details of type. And weirdly, they actually can be quite good at typing people in a sort of talent way, but their introverted thinking is going to be last. Extroverted thinking also not that strong. So it really, the use of type is going to be much more open-ended and diffusive. And it has to feel like really the tool that's on the workbench, including the mental workbench, not something that's going to box them in.
it's something that they can use when they need to for the situation right now, but not to like box in themselves. Because I can creative subtypes really be boxed in? And also, if the audience members are curious as to what the subtypes are, I'll have my video with Dario talking about the dominant, creative, normalizing, harmonizing link below too.
Mm.
So yeah. Is there anything about ISFPs you'd like to communicate, or do you feel complete?
I think that is just a reminder again, like we talked about with the INFP, that these two types are sort of or versions of the function stack of development are covering not all ISFPs, but like 5 out of 6 ISFPs gravitate towards these two like gravity wells, to use a metaphor, two different planets, but there are others like 1 and 6 that are going to be just their own sort of weird pattern of development. And then this is also, the first one reflects much more the grant stack of like first, second, third, fourth, albeit we're mixing a little bit up because all of the data from multiple instruments points to this tricycle model. Like the 6 function is more important than we might think. A lot of people do develop that. But then the second one is much more, I think, the Quank version, where she said, no, 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 no. She said for ISFP, she would say it's FISENE. And she said, no, it's actually extroverted intuiting that's third, which today we would be like, what are you talking about? Then like, how would you even tell the difference between INFP and ISFP? But that was her stance as a psychotherapist, observing people. And I think that the second version is the one that is, in fact, it's a good question because ISFPs, if they're open and patient to learning about type, The first version is going to have a little bit of a time struggling separating themselves from how they've adapted. Because unlike INFP, where the INFP who's working corporate America, there's this NF self-awareness that's like, oh yeah, I definitely don't normally belong here, but I'm making a choice to be here. Whereas I think with the SP types, their adaptivity is much more fused with their personality. Like they just naturally are very adaptive. And so they're like, yeah, they might actually take an assessment and scores like INTJ because they've really leaned into their opposite. And then the second version is going to be like, oh yeah, like I could see myself as ISFP, but I could also be INFP or INFJ, and they're much more likely to lean into that NF side of themselves. And I would say for those of you, if you're not ISFP, but you know ISFPs, these are the kinds of, like, is it version A or version B, or you can get into the subtypes and get a lot more detail, or maybe they're just their own weird version.
Definitely audience members, think about the different ISFPs and INFPs you know, and how they fit into these subtypes, and I hope it gave you some aha moments. And so thank you, Dario, for sharing your study's findings, and, I believe you're writing a paper with Mina as well too on it, so or
Yes, we and this will be for a peer-reviewed social psychology journal. So at long last, after many decades, we will be able to point to the validity of the 8-function model in terms of there being 8 functions and one of them is dominant. And then these sort of broad statements, it's just that those broad statements about development and the stack are not going to be the one single perfect model that everyone tends to look at in the type community.
Yeah. All right, cool. So thank you for pioneering that direction. Thank you everyone for watching. We'll see you all in the next video.